So the Siege of Gondor and the subsequent Battle of Pelennor Fields need no introduction. These two back-to-back battles are some of the biggest fantasy set-piece battles of all time. Did you know that these were also inspired by real battles? Let's talk about it. My name is Peter Capozzi, also known as Peter Cap. I am the author of the Godshard series, and welcome to Peter's No Cap History, the show where I combine my loves of history and fantasy to provide potential points of inspiration for aspiring fantasy artists, writers, and world builders. For simplicity's sake, when I'm talking about both battles like together, I'm going to call it the War for Gondor going forward, because otherwise it's going to be a nightmare for me to talk about both these things at the same time. So originally I was going to talk about how two battles inspired the War for Gondor. Technically there's actually 3 battles I need to talk about here, because as I was doing research I came across some interesting things. So on the off chance you haven't seen anything related to Lord of the Rings, the War for Gondor was basically a major set piece of Return of the King, where we have one of the last major holdouts for the Men of the West, Minas Tirith and the Kingdom of Gondor, being attacked by a massive army from Mordor, the Haradrim, the Easterlings, the East, the Varangs of Khand, and a just this grand alliance of evil that wants to finally take down Minas Tirith. The Siege of Gondor phase, has forces of Mordor attacking the walls. We have this infamous battering ram known as Grond. And the Pelennor Fields phase of this whole thing has King Theoden of Rohan with thousands of horsemen arriving to help Gondor. And then later on, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli with thousands of men from the Southern Fiefdoms. The Army of the Dead was only in the film version, and the forces combined to beat back the armies of Mordor. King Theoden died in the battle, as well as some other supporting characters. The Witch King was also taken down for good through the combined efforts of Eowyn and Merry. Tolkien himself was a very learned man. He was a professor, he was a veteran of wars. He applied many of those things to Middle-earth. To start things out, I want to talk about the battle that Tolkien himself said he was inspired by somewhat for Pelennor Fields. And I'm specifically talking about the Pelennor Fields part of this. Forgive my pronunciation. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains, or Catalonian Fields. So already we have a title that sounds similar to Pelennor Fields. Now this battle was part of late antiquity. This battle was part of a grand alliance of the Russian Romans, the Saxons, the Visigoths, a lot of the, Germanic tribes, some of these I mentioned before, versus the Huns, led by Attila, as well as some other Germanic tribes that were involved, like the Franks and the Burgundians. There's several ways this battle inspired the Battle of Pelennor Fields. Maybe the idea of this big clash between the West and the East. And arguably the biggest thing for me was one of the leaders of the battle, Theodoric. You might notice that sounds very similar to Theoden, died in the battle. In a very similar manner to how Theoden died, his body was carried off while the battle was still going by knights and soldiers singing his praises and weeping for him, was also very similar. And Tolkien in general took a lot of inspiration from Germanic culture, so I can understand why this certainly inspired a lot there. You're gonna notice a theme with this. It's like when I say take inspiration from battles, I don't mean it in an allegorical sense. Nor are we talking about stuff that's too direct. We're talking about vague inspirations, sometimes more in terms of the geopolitics than anything else. Because if you're too literal with this, you end up with like what happened with the Battle of the Bastards, which I've talked about in my last video about how trying to be too literal ended up causing problems. The thing is that there are 2 other battles that I can't confirm one way or another if Tolkien was inspired by them, but I'm inclined to believe he was. This is just conjecture, these are just my opinions going forward. You're going to see why I think that was the case though. And I'm going to try and make this as concise as possible. God knows there's a lot to talk about here. Another battle that I think inspired specifically the Siege of Gondor phase of this was the Siege of Constantinople in 1453, which was the fall of the Byzantine Empire, although some of its territories lasted for a few more decades. Looking at you, Trebizond. To explain why this battle has an inspiration on it, we need to talk about the hidden Roman connection with the realms of Numenor. The realms of Numenor, again, we're talking about Gondor and Arnor. Arnor is very much allegorical for the Russian Romans, and Gondor is allegorical for the Byzantines. Because if you know anything about the history of the Roman Empire, and you can see some of the parallels here. Arnor, the kingdom of the West, falls first. Gondor held out a lot longer. It's funny how even though Arnor had fallen way sooner, there's a lot of gravitas and romanticism in universe for Arnor. Aragorn is a descendant of the kings of Arnor. He's part of that branch. Isildur was the king of Arnor first. Seriously, there's all this reverence given to the Arnor side of things. Supposed to be based on the Russian Romans. Well, Russian Romans had Rome. It had, the origins of a lot of the stuff. Again, it's very subtle, but the reference is sort of there. And Gondor, just like the Byzantines, lasted a lot longer. If you look at the history of Gondor, you have a similar push and pull with a lot of its enemies, just like the Byzantines. Various generations of Turkic peoples with, Persian types from the Arabian Peninsula, like histories of enemies. There's this push and pull with the Byzantines reclaiming territory and losing it, winning against these guys and then being pushed back, with the Byzantine Empire shrinking more and more each time, just like with Gondor. And this, of course, leads to the Siege of Constantinople being comparable in historical placement to the Siege of Minas Tirith. Right? I don't think Tolkien was trying to necessarily vilify the East. It's just taking some vague inspiration for the geopolitical flow for his own story. Now, obviously, the Siege of Constantinople ends very differently from the Siege of Minas Tirith. Constantinople falls, and Minas Tirith doesn't. And this leads into the other battle that I think inspired both the Siege of Minas Tirith and Battle of Pelennor Fields, the Siege of Vienna. The Siege of Vienna, also known as the Battle of Vienna, we're going to be talking about the one from 1683, because Vienna was sieged by the Ottomans multiple times. Now, the Ottomans were also the ones that took down Constantinople. For the centuries after that, they were trying to push their influence into Europe, and Vienna became kind of like a bastion that held out and kept the Ottomans in check. There was one time when the Ottomans almost succeeded. So again, already we have some more similarities. Here we have a city of the West holding out against forces from the East. But unlike the Siege of Constantinople, the Siege of Vienna had a different outcome, and a lot of it was due to reinforcements. Reinforcements from a kingdom that was a steadfast ally, as well as reinforcements from other fiefdoms or other estates. The theoretically old fealty, whether or not they would actually go to help, was a more ambiguous matter. In this case, we're talking about the Kingdom of Poland, as well as other duchies of the Holy Roman Empire, because Vienna was run by Austria, which was part of the Holy Roman Empire. See, stop me if you heard this one. A major city of the West that is holding out a siege against a large force from the East is saved by reinforcements from a neighboring kingdom, with a massive cavalry charge led by that nation's king. Seriously, the Siege of Vienna had the largest cavalry charge in human history, led by the infamous Winged Hussars, and this charge was led by the Polish king himself. Seriously, are you seriously going to tell me that this did not inspire Battle of Pelennor Fields? We have a cavalry charge in a similar vein. There's no way that wasn't an inspiration. It's improbable to think that Tolkien, well-learned man he was and knew about all these battles, there's no way he wasn't inspired from it. Again, technically I don't know for sure, but I want to believe that was part of it. You might notice that all three of these battles had several things in common. One, we had this theme of West versus East, monarchs leading from the front in cavalry engagements, and I think one of the reasons why a lot of the historical parallels work is, again, it's not too literal. Yeah, there's a lot of connections, and again, the cavalry charge is very similar. It's not too literal, and as a result, the references work. Yeah, in terms of how you can apply this to your own fantasy stories, Tolkien is the OG world builder, and his world building was solid. Even if he struggled to convey it at times, he thought through a lot of his stuff. As a result, he was able to make sure that his parallels were subtle enough to work without being too literal. It's a crucial thing to balance. It is a solid construct to take reference from. He is an excellent case study to show how you can take inspiration from historical battles and specific things without it being too literal. If you look to that for inspiration, and at least in a vague way, you can't go wrong, in my opinion. So that is basically it. There was a lot of stuff I talked about here. By the way, do you guys like these shirts? I have a TikTok shop now. You can find these as well as posters and stuff, and I have more stuff coming forward soon. That is it for now. I will see you guys later.